Welcome to today's episode of Words of the Wise. Today I have retired Chief Adone. He just retired about a year ago from Roxbury Township PD in New Jersey. Wellness is something that is really important to him, so I'm really looking forward to having this conversation today. Welcome to the show, Chief Adone. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thanks for having me, Paige. Look forward to it.
I'm looking forward to it as well. I wanted to maybe start with a little bit of background. I know that you started at NYPD early in your career, and then you just retired about a year ago. So give us a little
Mm,
bit of background on your career trajectory.
Sure. So I graduated college in 1998. At that time, probably like halfway through my college career, I realized I wanted to get into law enforcement. So as I was approaching my graduation, I started taking police tests, and I graduated in May of '98, and NYPD was the first one that came calling. So I got an opportunity to join them at the end of August of that same year. So I took the job and I went there. It was a great experience. I kind of knew that I didn't want to stay there for my whole career, but it was a great place to start. And I was there for only about 6.5 months. I was taking other tests. My ultimate goal was to get into Roxbury, the town that I did retire, as they had a good reputation. I was familiar with the area. So eventually, in March of 1999, I got hired by Roxbury, and I then restarted another police academy and did basically almost 10 months straight in the police academy between New York and New Jersey. And then I started my Roxbury career in July of 1999.
Wow. You look so young.
Thank you.
I feel like when you popped on here, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm like, you are already retired and you look like you're my age. So you obviously been doing something right. We'll have to share secrets after the podcast. But
Sounds good.
um, you said that Roxbury PD, that they had one of the most challenging physical standards for hiring. Can you tell us a little bit about that? What was that standard that was set? And do you think that by having such a high and challenging standard that helped with applicants, or what did you see on that front?
Sure. Yeah, so Roxbury does still to this day have a very, very strict, not only just in physical tests is kind of our bread and butter, but also our backgrounds were pretty intense. And, we really tried to be very selective with the candidates that we took. And so kind of knowing that was kind of made it a goal for mine to get hired there even back, 26 years ago.
Mhm.
But so really it starts with a PT test. I did take a written back when I got hired, but it was basically pass fail, and it was kind of we ended up phasing the written out. And then the PT test was really the real thing that separated us from everybody else. So for an example, probably can't quote every single standard we had, but
Yeah.
and these are 100% standards for each category, but for a mile and a half run to get 100%, you'd have to run it in 9:30 or under. Push-ups, you'd have to do 65 push-ups in a minute. For sit-ups, you'd have to do 50 in a minute. You'd have to do 15 pull-ups or 16 pull-ups for 100. So just kind of like, you can
Yeah.
see that it's pretty high standard. And then if you didn't get if you had to get a 90 or higher to even get to the next phase. So with those standards in mind, you didn't have to get 100 on everything, but you had to have an average of all the events of a 90 or higher to move on the process. So and back then, I got hired in 1999. You'd have 300 people show up for three positions. It was a
Right.
much different world than it is now. So, so when I took it, I don't remember exactly the number I competed with, but there was a good amount, and I actually finished number one overall in the process. So something I'm pretty proud of. But yeah, that definitely drew me to Roxbury, and it still does to this day draw a lot of people to my former agency because of the standard that they have.
It's really interesting that you say that because I do think that people, it's almost like psychology, where people want to be a part of something that feels elite. And if it's really hard to get into it, then automatically you think that that's elite, right? Like that's the standard that I want to be there. That's why we see a lot of people really wanting to be like on a SWAT team, or a lot of people really
Mhm.
wanting to strive for these things that are maybe a little bit more selective on who they bring in. And I had this experience, and this is maybe so silly, but I used to be a competitive cheerleader, and there was a team that was that way. it
Yeah.
was really, really hard and everyone was really, really good.
Hmm.
And the amount of people that would line up around the door, like around the block to be a part of that team was crazy. And so I do think psychologically we all want to be a part of something that we think is really elite and really, really good. But I also think that there's a lot of fear right now because you said, the landscape is so different. There used to be
Hmm.
300 applicants, and now it maybe doesn't look like that anymore. And I talked to a lot of different leaders across the country who are like, what do we do? It's like this question. I think there's a poll, where a lot of
Hmm.
agencies really want to have a really high standard, but there's a fear that it might push out applicants and they're already struggling to get people in the door. What is your perspective on this, kind of current climate with hiring and recruitment and the pool maybe being a lot smaller? Do you think that agencies are almost kind of forced to lower that standard, or do you think that you can still have a really high standard and still, get the amount of people that you need in the door?
Sure. So that's a great question, and I experienced it firsthand because in my 3 years as chief, we actually hired 15 officers, and we're only a 44 man department, 44 person department. So
Mm,
it's not like we have a lot of turnover. It just happened that a lot of people came up for retirement during that 3 year window.
sure.
So we had to replace a lot of people. So we were having hiring processes, twice a year or so during my time, and we saw, the amount of candidates that we had were significantly less each time. Um, However, so I'll tell you, so we never would change the standard as far as what the requirements were for the tests. The one thing we did do at one point is instead of like, and this was never like there was never a hard written rule that 90% or higher got you to an interview, but that was just kind of the standard. It would be like, it wasn't on paper that you had to get 90 or better, but that was kind of just a known thing in our kind of area. We kind of dropped it to like 85, and then sometimes between 80 and 85. We never went below 80, so it did give us a little bit more freedom to get people onto the interview phase, because if we went with strictly 90% on the physical, it would have really limited our numbers.
Sure.
And we did depending on how many people we had in that category, we would maybe lessen the curve a little bit, if you will. But we never changed our standard as far as what we required to get hired. You had to still do well on those events. And I think you can get in trouble because I think if you just worry about getting people in the door to fill a spot, you're when you hire somebody now, you're in most places in New Jersey, I know you're married to that person for 30 years. And once you get past that initial probation phase, if this person doesn't fit in or has problems, it's really difficult to get rid of a bad employee. So, and not that it always translates, but we have had a lot of success by linking. If you're physically fit, a lot of times you take care of other things in your life as well. You just seem to have, your house is usually in order if you pay attention to, taking care of yourself and details in your life. Obviously, then it goes to the background too, and there were some people that were very physically fit and then they would fail a background. So it has to be everything. But I believe that you still have to maintain a high standard. I think you're under more scrutiny now than you ever were before. So if you drop your standards and you just start getting people in the door because you got to fill a seat, I think you can get in trouble. So we were able to do it. Now, granted, we had less when we got to the background phase. We used to have maybe 10 people or so that, no, this guy washed out, or no one can go to this girl or this, whoever. But now maybe we're only taking three to the background phase, and we're just hoping we can get two out of those three, into
Mhm.
the academy. So that is something I definitely saw, but I just don't think you can really drop your standards dramatically if you want to have a good product.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's a really good point, and I think that it's big picture thinking too. I love that you said that, like, you might have this person for 30 years,
Yeah.
and we know what it's like, if you look at it as a team mentality, you want people who are going to help to elevate the team and not pull the
Mm.
team down. And so you want the best people on your team as possible, right? You look at
For
any
sure.
like professional sports team, like they're cherry
Yeah.
picking, right? Like they're trying to get the absolute best people, the best performers, the people, the best attitudes on that team to be able to move everything forward. And so, um, what do you think about, and maybe this is kind of an offshoot of this, but
Mhm.
a lot of agencies will have these standards or requirements to get the job, and then there aren't any continued standards, once they graduate from the academy. So was there anything that you guys kind of focused on, or was there a message that you tried to convey within the organization of the importance of maintaining that level throughout your career?
For sure. Yeah. So it's funny. I think also when you have such a high standard to get hired, for the most part, most of those people, it's already part of their lifestyle. And I
Mm,
feel like they tend to continue on that path. So we never actually had yearly physicals. It was mentioned when I first got hired by the chief who hired me, who was very he a lot of in a lot of ways he built the framework of kind of our physical fitness, at least approach to law enforcement and approach to getting hired. But it was really part of the culture long before I got there. But he attempted at one point to try to make a yearly physical, but there was some people, it was an issue with the union and things like that, so that never happened. But
mm,
one thing he did do that really I think contributed to us continuing on that path even after being hired is we have a really nice like almost like small college type gym at our building, and we work 12-hour shifts, and you get 1 hour of your shift as long as nothing, it's not crazy out there and you can't get freed up, but as long as it's a normal day, you get an hour of your shift of your 12 to go in and work out on duty. So I think he was really ahead of the game. His name was Chief Mark Knoll, but he's the guy who hired me, and he started that standard way back then that we continues and continue to this day. It's part of our culture. So to answer the question, I guess we never actually had to institute anything where you would have a yearly test, but when you get an hour of your day to work out, most people are going to take that even if they don't want to work out, they're going to take that break, come off the road, get on the treadmill, lift weights, whatever they want to do. And then one other thing that I incorporated once I became chief is we actually built we just had a real big emphasis on police jujitsu in general, but then there's a kind of a police aspect of it now with compliance holds and things like that, which have become really more important in our profession. But we put in a full mat room, so you could also take an hour of your shift, not 2 hours, but you have one total hour to, whack up however you want. But you could go into the mat room and do rounds with some of the other jujitsu practitioners, or you could go in the gym and do what you want in there. So that kind of culture, I think, helps mental and physical health. And it's kind of become the standard at Roxbury for a long time.
yeah, I think it's interesting for you to say that, like, because we started up here, because we had such a high
Mhm.
standard, it was easier for people to maintain that throughout their career, because it was something that was already ingrained in them to start.
Yeah,
I've had people in my life tell me that I set a really high standard for other people around me.
sure.
And sometimes I think it's said almost as if it's too high. And I've had to do a lot of
Right.
self-assessment, and
Sure.
ask myself, is that true? Am I
Yeah.
being too difficult on people? Is
Mhm.
is the standard too high? And I think I've come to the conclusion that, of course, you don't want to set unattainable standards. Like, you don't want
Mhm.
something where no one can do it and you're setting
Right.
people up for failure. But I do think that, whether it's in our professional lives and our personal lives, we should hold people at a high standard, because we should be trying to grow. Like, we should be trying to elevate ourselves personally and professionally as we go along. And I do believe that if you set the standard, people will rise to that standard. And so we have to kind of consider, what is that standard that we're setting? Is it too low? Is it too high? Is it just high enough where, it's kind of hard to meet, but it's worthwhile. It's worth, striving to get there. And so I do think that if you set a high level early and that standard, people will rise to that level that you set.
Yeah, totally agree. I totally agree. And I think that whole, the saying iron sharpens iron, right?
Mm,
The more you surround yourself with people that are slightly better than you or competitive, on your level, I think people are naturally competitive. And, to that point, when if 5 out of the 6 guys on the squad are taking their hour to go work out and you're the one guy that doesn't, you kind of feel like, man, I mean, maybe should I be doing that? Like, it kind of
Mhm.
makes you almost by, without even having to say it, it kind of creates a standard and it creates a culture, and people want to be part of the culture. They should be want to be part of the culture. That's what makes, teams great, departments great, any kind of workplace great. So I think that's a really good point, and I think it's great to surround yourself with people that elevate you instead of, bring you down.
100%. And I think that when you create that type of culture and that team mentality, then the people who aren't doing it are the minority, right? We
Yes.
know that everything is contagious. Positivity is contagious,
Mhm.
motivation is contagious, also negativity and laziness
Yes.
is also contagious. And so, how can you create an environment where the majority are on the path of motivation, inspiration, they're positive and they're reaching for more healthy, positive outlets, and everyone else is the minority because I think you're right. And maybe you don't get 100% of people all the time. Maybe there
Sure.
are some people who, even if they are the minority, they're going to sit there with their arms crossed and, not do the thing.
Sure.
But if I would rather have the majority be those who are lifting each other up than the reverse, which sometimes we do see that in organizations where it's the reverse. And it's so
Yes.
hard to like lift everyone back up. So to start there
Yeah.
early is, I think, a really good strategy.
Sure. And culture is everything. A
Yeah.
good work culture is really everything, and it's contagious. And like you said, even if there is a small faction that doesn't buy in, they don't have any influence. If the
Mhm.
majority of the group is driving the group, then they're the outcasts, and it doesn't become the reverse. So I think it's really, really important.
Yeah. I had someone ask me that before. I've had a couple situations I think are really funny. So I've walked into
Yeah.
agencies before and I've been prepped, right? I've had someone,
Mhm.
come up to me and they're like, hey, like I'm going to sit in on this because like there's one guy in there that is not going to have it. And we just want to
Right.
make sure that he's not disrespectful to you and, that he like, quote unquote behaves and, whatever.
Sure. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and at the end of it, of the presentation, it was that very guy that came up to me and was like, hey, like, what do I do? Like, I want to do this, and
Mhm.
everyone was like, what? Like, what just happened? And I think that, I think everyone is motivated by different things. And how can we create an environment that, we try to understand what kind of gets people to move, to take that
Mhm.
step. And it's going to be different for everybody. But if you have that majority who are already like, yes, we're doing it, this is part of our culture, like iron sharpens iron, like we're doing this together. How can they also maybe try to influence other people in ways that are important to them, things that are going to get them to maybe start prioritizing it for themselves. And so that's a whole nother like complex thing.
Yeah.
But I think that sometimes we kind of say, well, that person's never ever going to do it, so what's the point? But I think that we're doing a disservice when we say that. It's saying, hey, like
Yeah.
I'm going to continue to lead by example. And maybe this one thing that I say or do, or, maybe if I try it this way or if I present it that way, maybe that'll get them to do the thing. And so I think it's also important to not just give up on people and say, well, that person's just going to sit in the back and they're never going to do it. But, maybe we just haven't presented it in a way that's important to them yet, or maybe they're not in a place yet, but they will be someday. And so it's worth the effort to continue to try to elevate everybody, because I do think that you're as strong as your weakest link.
100%. I totally agree. I've even seen, in some circumstances where maybe someone that is, stuck on in an assignment like patrol, say, for a long time, and maybe they got passed over for detective bureau, community services, traffic, whatever. And they're kind of, they have some time on and they're getting frustrated and they have kind of a negative attitude, then that they kind of get painted as the negative person. But people forget that when this person started in their first few years, they were really productive employees. They were part of the team, but now they feel kind of like, ostracized, and they feel like they've been passed over, and they're not valued. So I think sometimes people like that need an olive branch, and you have to give
Mhm.
them something new to get them back on the team and get them motivated again. So I saw that a lot in my career too, where like, some people were painted unfairly because they had just been doing the same thing for a long time. They didn't feel like they were getting their value is being maximized at the agency. They feel like they could do more, you know.
Yeah.
And I think I've seen it more than once where someone that had a negative stigma was given an opportunity and they became incredible employees and outworked a lot of the people that were, at the time considered golden boys or whatever you want, whatever you want to say, whatever the
Yeah.
terminology. But I do think there's something to that. You have to figure out what motivates people, and you have to sometimes give them a chance to succeed before you can close the book on them.
I like that a lot. And, I think that stagnation is really hard.
Yes.
Burnout is really hard. And
Mhm.
I would challenge, anyone who's listening to this podcast, we've all been there, at
Mhm.
varying levels, where like maybe it just, they're like, wow, like I just feel like it's Groundhog's Day and I'm just doing the same thing over and over. And I just feel uninspired or
Yeah.
unmotivated, and feeling stagnant is really difficult. And I also think that we have to consider that there's real life stuff happening too. Maybe
Sure.
someone is going through something difficult in their personal life. And so I think the overgeneralization is something that I've done before too. I've
Mhm.
judged people for surface level stuff and
Mhm.
maybe didn't take the time to dig deeper to try to understand why these things are happening, why there's certain
Yeah.
behaviors. And I think that if we can maybe try to have more of an open mind when we look at people and say, okay, they're behaving this way, is there a reason and is there a solution? And I think solution based conversations win every single time, but there has to be awareness around it, right?
Sure.
And
Absolutely. Yeah.
you told me a little bit, as the chief, you were trying to really identify some of those early warning signs, of maybe people who were struggling or
Mhm.
maybe needed something above and beyond what they were being given at the moment. And you started reviewing body cam footage and started kind of seeing certain things and certain behaviors. Can you explain a little bit about that and maybe what some of those behaviors that you were looking for were for kind of that early detection to be able to then, make some changes or offer some solutions?
Sure, absolutely. So when I first took over, took over in December of 2021, and at that time we had not gotten body cameras in our agency yet. They had become mandatory only in 2021, but you had about a year or so to get everything up and running. So we were in the process when the old chief left and I took over of kind of transitioning the department into this very new world of body cameras. And there's obviously a lot of negativity about that initially. I think over time everyone has learned that how valuable they are and how it really, because 99.9% of the guys are doing their job properly, that it's really going to help you more than it hurts you. But I think initially there's this whole idea of like, I got this thing on me because nobody trusts me and everything I do is going to be recorded. It's just an uncomfortable feeling. And I would have been the same way as a young patrolman. I wouldn't have wanted this thing on me initially. And so there was like, there's a lot of kind of getting people to buy into that and then just implementing them and things like that. So there was definitely a learning curve when we first started. So it took about a year or so of kind of watching some of the videos. So anytime there was a critical incident, it would be reviewed by the sergeant and lieutenants, and eventually, the more serious ones would go to me. And really, you're just watching them to kind of get a grasp of what happened and make sure things were done properly at the scene and things like that. But what I started noticing is, which I didn't expect to see initially, is when you have these officers coming across these scenes, and some of them were horrific. You see that they have like a physical reaction to what they see when they're not expecting to see it.
Mm,
Whether it's someone who's deceased or if it's a motor vehicle accident with serious injuries or a child in some kind of distress. You can see that their demeanor changes and they they can't hide it. It's kind of hard. Everyone's different, but you can
yeah.
tell when someone is going through something, and maybe they don't even know it at the time, but you can see it on camera when you look at it. So it made me kind of expedite. I had in my head the idea of trying to institute some type of wellness program at some point when I was chief. But when I first got on, became the chief, there's a lot of things thrown at you and it's overwhelming and you feel like feel like you're sinking a lot. But in addition to that, the body camera thing was something that was like on the forefront when I first took over. And I never realized that that's actually also what ended up getting me back on track and wanting to create some type of wellness program, because the body cameras tied into it directly, because as I was watching them, I was seeing these things and making me realize that it's no longer, you can't be on the back burner anymore. I have to kind of move forward with it. So
Yeah.
that's kind of what I saw. But really, just because I remember being in those situations before body cameras, and you would see something horrible, and but you would kind of downplay. By the time you get back to the guys, it's like you try to, make light of it in some way that makes it like it didn't affect me. Like, you have to always have that, we used to always have that type of mentality. But you can't fake it in that moment when someone's watching it. You're going through it in the real time, and that moment is captured. And when you see someone react in a certain way, and especially like we were talking about, like almost the person who came to you at the end of the class. A lot of times it's some of the bigger, tougher guys that I want right behind me on a call where something is going to go south. So it's not always a lot of times it was someone you may not think that is having this kind of reaction. So anyway, yeah, as I started kind of going through these things and reviewing it, I really realized like I need to figure something out, and I wasn't exactly sure what I even wanted to do. I just knew I wanted to do something, but it got me on the track of kind of thinking that way and making it more a priority.
Yeah. We are talking about humans. And I think that
Yeah,
that was such an important reminder, that like, yes, you guys are super strong and tough. And the things that you see and experience impact everyone, because
yeah,
you are humans, you are not robots. And so I appreciate you like sharing that it was like the big tough guys and you're like, whoa, like they're
yeah,
having a response to this. Yeah, because they're human too. You guys
exactly.
are all human. And so I think it's how can we continue to recognize that the things that you see that humans are not supposed to see those things on a consistent basis. You guys are obviously trained to be able to handle some of those things, but you also need the resources to be able to recover from that stuff, and it's really difficult. And I think that, people maybe in the public don't recognize that as much as they should, and be able to kind of take a step back and understand the humanness of this. But I also think that sometimes we all forget because like you guys are out there doing it every day and super strong, and we forget that it's like, yeah, like, all right, like what can we do? So it sounds to me like the body cams really were that kind of like aha of like, oh yeah, like we
Right.
need to be able to prioritize these things. Do you think, and maybe this is doesn't have to be set in stone, but maybe we can have the conversation of, do you think that having resources and, especially maybe even at a bare minimum, like post-critical incident resources,
Yeah.
do you think that those things should be mandatory or voluntary?
Yes, good question. So
It's a
when
hard
I,
one.
s-
I think a lot of
it
people kind of
is.
go back and forth on that question.
Yes, yes, for sure. So what I did was initially, I kind of, the program that I created, I kind of phased in.
Okay.
Um, I did make, especially, there's one particular critical incident which that kind of really sparked everything, but and also kind of got me on this path. But I I made the critical incident debriefings mandatory. I felt like either way, I'm going to have someone come in, a trained professional come in, sit down with the group, and then sit down with each person individually because I know I had been in those. We had done them in the past, but every time I had ever done them in the past, it was kind of like one of those circle of trust deals, and it was
Yeah.
a lot of times it was peer led. So there was like some cops from other agencies, and it was helpful. I'm not downgrading at all. It was helpful. But I'm still in a room with a bunch of guys and girls that I work with every day that, my life's in their hands and their life's in mine. And I still, at least, and I feel like other people were like this too, I was still always very cautious in that environment to really let my guard down. So, you would share certain things, but you weren't really being fully open. At least I know I wasn't. So I wanted to do something where, they would have a chance to speak to someone one on one in a room that's not recorded. That, in fact, the doctor that did it for us, and it was his idea, not mine, but it was a great idea. Clearly, he knew what he was doing, but he wouldn't even bring a pad in the room. So there's no pad. It's just we're talking, and
There's no
and it was
evidence of this conversation.
exactly, yeah, right, exactly, yeah,
Yeah.
because that's part of the stigma, right, that we deal with. But
Right.
so that became mandatory, and I think that was helpful. And I did have people come to me afterwards and be like, you know what, that was great. I like that a lot better than how we used to do it, things like that. And then I wanted to expand on that. That really wasn't, I felt like, enough because, yeah, you may have two or three real critical incidents during the course of a year that, and but then all you're also only dealing with the individuals who were on that particular call. But the reality is we're seeing traumas every day and in different ways, and they there's a cumulative effect of some of the things that maybe don't ring the bell to be a critical incident, but you're still dealing with very stressful situations every day and seeing things that are eventually kind of pile up. And like I always like the metaphor, like you're carrying luggage and the luggage just keeps getting heavier
Yeah.
as the more these calls pile on, it just becomes more of a burden for you. And at some point, a lot of times you will have effects. So what I did was initially, in addition to the critical incident debriefs, I started something where it was like a non-mandatory opportunity to go in and speak to someone who was a local clinician who was specially trained in trauma revolving around first responders and critical incidents and things like that. Um, so basically dealing with cumulative trauma. So I kind of we kind of came up with a framework. The way it worked was someone was, we had X amount of spots were available per month for our officers to go. It was completely anonymous, and then I would get a bill at the end of the month for five people went or three people went. There was no names, there was no anything like that, and it was a little bit tough at first because on the finance side of things and the town side of things, they're like, well, they have insurance to go do this. Why are we using budgeted money from the police department to pay for? And I kind of took it like, well, listen, I'm just trying to expose them to it. I don't care, and I feel like people were less likely to use their insurance and go to a doctor if they think it's again going to be documented in some way. They have to, is the town going to see the medical claims when they come through and see that, I've been seeing someone for, my mental health, things like that. So I just wanted to make it a separate thing where they could go anonymously and not have any kind of fear that something was going to get back to so, and so we started that. So I honestly thought like it's going to be like the first couple months we're going to have nobody go. We might not have anybody go for the first year. I really didn't know what to expect. Well, I was shocked when I started getting these bills, and all of a sudden, like four people went the first month. Then there was like eight people, and then 10 people. I'm like, wow, like people are actually taking advantage of this, and it made me realize that I was on the right track. So we did that for a little less than a year, about 8 months. Kind of worked this out where they could do it, and then starting the next year, I made it mandatory that everyone would get a one-on-one wellness check once a year with this same clinician. So she would come up to the police department, set up in a secure area, and we would schedule people for her to see that day. And it really, again, people came to me afterwards, and again, people I would not expect, and kind of came up to me and said, you know what, like I really wasn't happy that you did this, and I thought it was a big mistake. And now I couldn't be happier that you gave me this opportunity because you might have saved my life. So when people say things like that to you, it like really made me it validated anything that I did in my career more than anything else, to be honest with you.
I always say, and I know it's like such a cliche, it's so cheesy, but I think it's so true. It's better to have something and not need it than to not have it and need it.
Right?
So and I think that so often, we kind of get in our own way of being like, oh, like we'll deal with it later, or like we're afraid that things aren't going to work. And I think it's so much better to put place in resources if you can swing it, right? Obviously I know
Mhm.
there's budgets and things of that nature, but for you to put it in place and be like, you know what, like I don't know if people are going to use this, but I'm going to do it anyway
Mhm.
because I know that like if and when someone needs it, I want it to be there. Like I want there to be a soft landing for people. And then for that to like exceed your expectations is such a cool story. But I think that the way you positioned it was really interesting. I don't know if you noticed this, but you said I gave people the opportunity to
Mhm.
do this.
Yes.
And framing is really important when it comes to
Mhm.
presenting new ideas, to people and saying like,
Right.
hey, I'm going to give you guys the opportunity to do this thing that's really beneficial. I think it makes people want to do it. It made me want to do it. When you use that word, I was like, sign me up. Like, how do I take
Yeah.
advantage of this really cool opportunity? So
Right.
I don't know if that was intentional or not, but when I heard that word, I kind of smiled. I was like, that's a really smart way to present something, making people feel like, hey, like not a lot of people get this opportunity, but like we're giving it to you, and then that encourages people to then take action. I thought that was really cool.
Oh yeah, thank you. I didn't plan it that way, but I'm glad that it made you want to sign up. Yeah,
Can I ask you,
yeah.
as a leader, why was this so important to you? And do you think that wellness starts with leadership?
Yeah, for sure. So I'll let you behind the curtain here and give you my personal story of why this is so important to me. Um, so really, I experienced this myself with anxiety and panic attacks, and um, that's what kind of set me on this path many years ago. I believe it was like my seventh or eighth year on patrol. I had still been, working, doing shift work, nights, weekends, and we would do a month of days. We did 12-hour shifts. We do a month of days, and then go to a month of nights. And the first thing that started happening is when I was young and my early 20s and such, I never really had trouble sleeping during the day. You would go home from after midnight shift and fall asleep, and you could sleep till 2 or 3 o'clock in the afternoon, wake up, have something to eat, and go back to work. Like it wasn't a big deal. As I got closer to 30, and I still at that time was still no children, I wasn't married, but it did start getting more difficult, even though I didn't have really any more responsibilities at home at that point. It just was more difficult to sleep. So I started noticing the first thing was I really had trouble sleeping when I was on night shift. And then you go to work and you start compiling a couple shifts in a row where you really didn't sleep much. And just as a result of that, you're always tired, and maybe you're more sensitive to certain physical symptoms you might be having. But as things can that was the first thing that I kind of noticed. And then what started happening, I don't know if it was a direct result or just by coincidence, as things progressed, I started having some physical symptoms of different things. So for example, and it was not always, but it was mostly, especially when it started during the night shift when things were not busy at all. So like for me, the witching hour was that 3 a.m. to 6 a.m. when we got off time period when nothing was going on, and be driving around or parked somewhere in a park, just kind of chilling for a little bit. And it would be like, my vest is a little tight, and I'm kind of sweating, and it's not, I shouldn't be sweating. And I have a little bit of discomfort in my chest. Am I having a heart attack? And all these physical symptoms, which I never at that time in my life had. I was always, pretty physically fit and didn't have any kind of medical issues. And I started experiencing these things for the first time. And I never even thought for a second that it could be related to my mental health. I just
Mhm.
figured, man, am I having a heart attack? Or why am I, sweating at night? And why am I having this like nervous feeling in my stomach for no reason? I feel like I have a lump in the back of my throat. Things like that would happen. It wouldn't be everything at once. Sometimes it'd be one thing, sometimes it'd be two or three things. And the intensity would vary, and the onset and time would vary, and how long it would last would vary. So there's a lot of like variables, but it was really like concerning to me. But it started happening more frequently. It would happen once in a while initially, and I would kind of just blow it off, get through it, and forget about it. And then as they started happening more frequently, I started getting concerned. So I went to a medical doctor. Again, that's the only lane I thought I needed to be in at that time. And did a full checkup. They actually sent me for a full executive physical, did the stress test, EKG, all that kind of stuff, and came back, everything was 100% fine. So then for the first time, my medical doctor said, maybe you should go talk to a psychologist. This could be something. You could be having panic attacks and anxiety. It could be job related, and you should go talk to someone. So again, now I got the clean bill of health. I still wasn't ready to make that step. To me, that was a drastic step at the time. I couldn't
Right.
put I felt like it was a sign of weakness, and I think a lot of us do feel that way. And I felt like I'm fine, this and that. So I put it off again, and finally got to the point where my quality of life was suffering. Like I was having these things even when I was off duty, and I couldn't figure out why. And again, just became something where I'm like, you know what, I was desperate. So I found a psychologist. Of course, I found someone like 45 minutes away from where I lived and worked, so that I didn't happen to run into someone as I was walking into the building, something like that. So yeah, I found someone, and I'll never forget. Like it's one of the moments in time that I have marked in my life where in that first session I went in there and I just unloaded. I got everything off my chest. and kind of described for the first time, because I had not told anyone, like, I had not told anyone at that time about what I was experiencing and everything. So I let it all out, and I never felt relief like that before. Like I felt like literally a burden was just lifted off my shoulders. And walking out of the office that day, I remember thinking to myself, like, okay, I'm on the right track. Like I'm going to figure this out. So that was it. And then, over time, that's when I first learned about, how cumulative trauma can affect people, and how it manifests in people in different ways. And then I started learning about, like, yeah, you're not gonna defeat this anxiety thing. It's going to always be with you, but there's ways that you can battle it, and the ways that you can minimize it. And there's ways so I started learning about breathing techniques, and kind of changing your mindset, and just kind of different little techniques that I started using when these things would sneak up. And it was tough at first, but really over time, and I was in therapy at that point for like 5 years all together, and I really worked on it. And at the end of the day, I still to this day will have times where these things will creep in, but now I'm equipped to deal with it, and it's never gotten to that point where it was 20 years ago, and during that period of time when I was really going through it. So knowing that and having that experience, it always was something that I kind of felt like, if I ever have a chance to kind of do something for, because there's got to be other people that are dealing with this. Like I can't be alone. Even though I never talked about it, I never got confirmation of that at the time. I felt like there has to be other people that are going through the same thing as me. And then I did get confirmation of it when I became chief, and implemented this from multiple people, like we talked about, people you'd least expect it from, came to me on the side and kind of reinforced the fact that, like, this was the right thing to do. So that's kind of where my story started and ended.
Thank you. I really
Yeah.
appreciate you sharing that. And it's so relatable. Everything that you said with having fear and not wanting to do it, and then, going 45 minutes away so that no one would know.
Right.
And then the weight that's lifted when you finally do take that step.
Yeah.
And then I appreciate the tactical things that you said that helped you along the way, the breathing
Mhm.
techniques, some of those things that helped you.
Yeah.
So thank you for sharing and showing a level of vulnerability from someone in leadership to say, hey, like, you're not alone. I did these things. And then this is how it helped me to be able to then help others. And that's the whole goal. How can we first take care of ourselves? Because we have to, in order
Yes.
for us to take care of other people, like we have to be good. So, how can
Yeah.
we take that step, that first step, and be courageous? And then, how can we use all of those lessons and experiences that we had to then pay it forward to help other people who are struggling, or to maybe help them so they don't have to struggle in the same ways, through having these proactive conversations. So, my final question for you is for, kind of the younger generation coming in. What words of wisdom, all the things that you went through in your career and, as a leader, what words of wisdom could you pass off to people who are younger in the career? Maybe something that you wish you would have known earlier, or something that's helped you along the way.
Sure. And I got to do that a little bit on my way out. My farewell tour there, I did get to speak to a lot of the younger guys, and we had a very young department when I left. So, first thing is, I think you have to have interests and friends outside of law enforcement. I think we very many of us, and I was one of them, fell into the trap. When you first get hired, you're young, you're experiencing all this stuff for the first time, and there's a real camaraderie that develops, especially with the people that you work with on your squad. And a lot of times that's the only people you want to be around, because they're the only ones that understand what you're going through. They aren't the only ones that understand the trauma that you're seeing, and you kind of get yourself in a little bit of an island, and
Mhm.
you got to get out of that. I think when you get out of that, a good thing for me was, you join a jujitsu gym, and do something that you're going to meet people from all walks of life, but it's also a common interest. You're also going to have cops there too, and it's also good for your profession. But you got to get outside of that bubble where you're only hanging out with cops. Obviously that's going to be your core friends, probably almost always, but you need to have some interest and some friends outside of law enforcement. I think that's a really big thing to do.
Yeah. Thank you. I
Absolutely.
appreciate your time so much. Thank
Yeah.
you for coming on here and sharing some of the things that have impacted you, some of the things that you did organizationally. I really appreciate your time.
Sure. I really appreciate you having me, and I think you're doing great things. And I really think resources like you, it's so great that you're doing what you're doing. And the more that gets out there, the more other people are going to be able to take advantage of some of these things and just have a better work and home life.
Thank you. I really appreciate that. We'll stay in touch for
Thank you.
sure.
Sounds good.